And repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
Keeping the palm joined. Put palms down. All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome, nice to see you all. Thanks for being here. There's a kind of theme that's been coming up the last maybe few days, 4, 5, 6 days around classes here. Anyone struggling with anger? You're laughing. Yeah, a little bit? That much? You didn't even need to raise the hand, just straight into laughter. Struggle with anger. Just a couple of you. Not bad. That's good. So the practice of gratitude is really difficult, but super important. Because when we find ourselves in these moments of anger, moments of frustration, moments of disappointment, whatever it might be, the practice is to find a sense of gratitude and appreciation for everything you have. The Buddhist teachings very clearly say that we overcome anger with compassion. But it's really easy to just say, have compassion. It's really easy to read a book that says, have gratitude. But what does that actually look like in your life? And that's different for everybody. And we'll get into a little bit more after meditation. But it's something to maybe, as we go into meditation, to be thinking about that. Do you struggle throughout your day with anger and frustration? Because if you do struggle throughout your day with anger and frustration, then having a sense of compassion towards self, first and foremost, is learning to love self, have compassion for self. I get it, Buddhist teachings, non-self, but we're not there yet. So we have this pain that we're dealing with. So it's important to understand what is causing that, and then how to come out of it with the sense of self-compassion and gratitude, and really finding appreciation for all we have in our lives. And that's really difficult to do on a day-to-day basis because there's so many things that frustrate us, annoy us, bother us, that take us out of a peaceful, happy place and into a place of just anger. So, and for me as a practitioner, I spent 25 years of my life just angry. And this practice has been life-changing in that regard. So, with that, we'll start with the meditation practice. To those who are joining virtually, thanks for joining us. Feel free as you are to say hello. There's a chat box on your screen somewhere. A couple things to tell you before we begin the meditation, especially for those who might be new. Nothing's going to happen to you, right? You're not going to float away. You're not going to have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice, meaning don't ask yourself, is this working or not working? Are you doing it right or wrong? We're just going to sit, we're going to breathe. All right, you'll hear sounds inside the room, sounds outside. This is life. Life is filled with chaos, and this practice is learning to get quiet and still within all the chaos. Posture, you just want to be comfortable. If you're on a cushion, often helps slide into the front third, pushing the stomach forward allows the back to straighten. If you're on a bench or chair, however you're seated, also just trying to sit up straight, relaxing the shoulders. Hands can be on the knees or in the lap, whatever's comfortable for you. If you need to move during meditation, simply move. Movement doesn't make you a bad meditator. It just means your leg hurts or you have an itch. I will guide us as we begin, and we'll settle into a little bit of silence. And starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed. Start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And eventually, you'll settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus, to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue in this practice, observing sensation of breath. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it. Release that thought. Return attention, focus to the breath. Breathing in, follow breath in. Breathing out, follow breath out. Learning to be comfortable in stillness, in quiet, wanting nothing but to sit and breathe. Letting go of expectations, letting go of judgment from the practice, just sitting, breathing. And with the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. And no one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. And once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. As you slowly open the eyes, slowly beginning to move. And most important, with the practice of meditation, to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, if it's quiet, calm, and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how you sit and hold the hands across the legs. It has nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It has everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external situation. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada, means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being, no different than any one of us, who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. And what that means, very simply, for all of us, regardless of where we come from or what we believe in and where we think we're going, our whole life is filled with things that happen. We react. More stuff happens. More reactions. That's what we get. This practice is simply learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way you responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to everything else that's happening throughout your day. So all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. It's not an easy practice. It's not necessarily fun. It's not an escape. Most of us have enough escapes in our lives. This is direct perception into the present moment and being with life as it arises. And very often, as we know all too well, life as it arises is incredibly difficult, challenging, filled with chaos. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. It's sitting, breathing, becoming aware of what you think, what you say, and what you do. Once we stop trying to change, fix, control, manipulate everything and everyone around us, which is where we spend so much time, and we work on changing our mind and our reaction to the world around us, life gets a little simpler. But it is a practice. It's not a quick fix. It's not a 6-week course. It doesn't necessarily change your life overnight. But if you continue to stay with this practice, taking care of yourself first, keeping your mind, your heart healthy, and understand how that impacts everybody around you. Think good thoughts, speak good words, do good deeds. It sounds really simple, but it's really difficult to treat ourselves with love and kindness and to treat others that way as well. It's really difficult. So we continue to be patient, continue to work hard at it. You know, we work hard at so many things in our lives. Anything you've achieved or accomplished, or anywhere you've arrived in your life, took a lot of hard work. Just to get through every day sometimes takes a lot of hard work. For some people, just getting out of bed is hard enough, right? But when it comes time to take care of mental, emotional health and well-being, we often don't make time for it. It becomes this thing we kind of add on to the last part of our day. So if we put the same effort, assuming the effort you put in was a lot, if we put the same effort into taking care of ourselves that we put into other things we've been successful at, then we begin to cut through some of that greed, some of that anger, some of the delusions that cause us to struggle so much. All the cravings, all the desires. If we work hard at cutting through that, life can be simpler. But like I said, it's not easy. So I'll pause there. For me, as always, I really just prefer to respond to questions. Meditation, Buddhist practice, anything you're sitting with. And we use the rest of our brief time tonight for that. So I'll just open up to questions. And for those who are joining virtually, again, welcome. Glad you're here. As you have been, there's a chat box on your screen. Feel free to say hello if you have any questions. You can put them there, and I'll do my best to respond as well. So we'll open up to questions, meditation, Buddhist practice. Anything that's on your mind. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if you can answer this, but I just saw this. I just read this article. It's like 30 to 50% of people don't have an inner dialogue.
Okay.
And like I have a very loud one. Like it's not necessarily racing, but it's always singing that. And just in your thoughts, would not having an inner dialogue be more helpful in meditation?
So let me just paraphrase the question for those maybe who didn't hear it or virtually. You just read an article that said 30 to 50% of people don't or do have an inner dialogue. It doesn't really matter.
It doesn't really matter.
I know, but I just want to repeat what you said,
Yeah.
that they do. Okay, so you read an article that said 30 to 50% of the people have an inner dialogue. And what you're asking is it helpful, beneficial to have one, to not have one? Because you definitely have one. That's what you're asking, yeah. So the first thing always is, I always like to point out when people, and I'm glad you brought you into it because that's really what it's about, but just for context, anytime we could read anything out there. And it doesn't matter if it happens to 99% of people. It's what is the impact for you? That's why, again, I'm glad you went there and said, hey, for me, this is where I'm at. Because that's, to me, with practice, really what's important is everyone in this room is completely different. We all deal with different stresses, different triggers, different emotions, different experiences, right? We never know what's going on in anybody else's head or heart. So we're all in a different place. That's first and foremost what's important. And the practice is important to begin to recognize, okay, where am I at? Forget about the 30 to 50%. Again, I know that wasn't the point of your question, but where am I at with this? And what I hear you saying is that you have quite a loud inner dialogue.
Yeah. And
you want to know if that's okay. Whether I say it's okay or not is completely irrelevant, right? Mm-hmm. The question I would ask you is not to answer, but to think about, is your inner dialogue beneficial or helpful, or is it harmful and irrelevant? You don't even need to answer that.
Yeah.
I mean, the smile on your face probably gave it away, but again, these are not things to like quickly grasp onto answers. They're things to explore. What is my inner dialogue? Meaning, what am I thinking? Whatever phrase we want to call it. What am I thinking all day long? And if my thoughts are coming from kind intention, pure intention, beautiful intention, some pretty good thoughts. If my thoughts are coming from selfishness, from greed, from anger, from hatred, those are probably not thoughts that are going to benefit you too much. So on one hand, it's important to understand, what are your thoughts? What's the intention behind them and how they impact your life and the life of those around you, right? Something we do with the college kids every week. We bring up topics and we say to them, how does this impact your life and the life of those around you? How does your ability to practice patience or lack thereof impact you and the life of those around you? So that's really the first step. Make sense so far? Mm-hmm. The second part is, ultimately, with practice, it's about staying in the present moment. So when we get angry, when we get sad, when we get depressed, our mind is usually thinking about something that happened at what point in time? Past. I'm angry about this. It happened 30 years ago. I'm still pissed off, right? My second grade teacher did that. It ruined my life, right? This relationship from 40 years ago, still can't get over it. Constantly in the past. And if you sit around and think about wonderful things that happened in your past, that might be a good thing to do once in a while. But the reality is, when we think about past, there's anger, sad, and depression. So after you spend 7 years filtering through all of that, you think about the future. Stress, anxiety, fear, worry, panic. All these things arise when our mind jumps to the future. Also not helpful. Right? I'm not suggesting that we stop planning, that we stop having goals, healthy goals or expectations, right, that are healthy and relevant, but just be mindful and aware of what your thoughts are actually doing to you. Is that helpful?
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm sure you're not the only one. I'm pretty sure in this room you got about 100% of racing inner dialogue mind in people. So I don't know who those 50 to 70% are that don't have a racing mind. Yeah, okay.
Jeff, what do you think about the grieving process? So if you've had, something recent that's been traumatic and your body, you're, I think, told to grieve and your body kind of just naturally grieves.
Yeah.
How do you think of, and that's in response to, something that technically happened in the past, but you're grieving in the moment.
Sure.
How do you kind of grapple with both of those? And especially if grieving, in some cases, should be healing.
Not very easily. Right? A beautiful question again to repeat or paraphrase for those virtually didn't hear it. How do you deal with grieving, and especially with your body physically grieving and feeling pain? And correct me if anything I say is wrong here, and if what happened technically is in the past, but you're grieving in the present moment, how do you deal with that? Yeah.
Yeah, especially since grief can take a long time.
Yes, grief can take a very long time. And, for me, I think when I look at Buddhist teachings around grieving, right, there's one story that is often referred to as the mustard seed, where a woman who recently lost a child goes to the Buddha. And, this is India 2,500 years ago, and, lots of mystical, magical power type stuff and thoughts. And so this woman goes to the Buddha and asks the Buddha to bring back her child. Now, the Buddha was just a human. He didn't do those types of things anyways, but that's how the story goes. And the Buddha asked the woman to go to every household and collect a mustard seed from someone that had never known death or loss. And she returns without one mustard seed. And so the first part of this does not address your question at all, but I want to start here, is to understand that this grieving process, the experiencing of loss, the experiencing of death, the experiencing of heavy trauma, is part of our life's experience. Doesn't make it good, doesn't make it pleasant, doesn't make it okay, but it is part of the human experience. And very often when we have these human experiences that are incredibly traumatic and painful, we resist them mentally and emotionally. We fight against them even though they've already occurred. Part of healing is embracing the experience for what it was, not what we wanted it to be. That makes sense so far? I'm sure 99 out of 100 people, forget that example, but when we go through tremendous pain, death, loss, it's not what we wished it to be. So as we move forward and we, as you said, looking back on an experience from the past that the grieving is today, when we look back on it, part of the reason that we have a difficult time healing is because we want the past to have been different. Now, please take this with an asterisk that says, I'm not suggesting it's bad to have wanted past things to have turned out differently. But no matter how much we want the past to have been different, can it ever be different? No. So for me, the first step in grieving has a lot to do with a word I'm sure we're all very familiar with, acceptance. Accepting what has happened. And knowing that nothing we can do can change that. And if we can begin to emotionally, mentally embrace that, I believe that's where we can begin to heal. And often I've found in 25 years of working with people who've gone through tremendous trauma, right? From combat veterans coming back with PTSD and TBI to adolescent teens, girls who've been physically, sexually, emotionally abused, tremendous trauma. So much of that inability to heal is still wrapped up in wanting to change what happened in the past. And that often delays drastically the grieving process, because we have a hard time differentiating between grieving and healing. Things that happen in the past, we don't ever have to be okay with. We don't ever have to like that they happened. And they can hurt every single day. And they may. But can we be healed with feeling that pain? Super delicate, super difficult. Yeah, that's just some thoughts. I see a hand in the back. Well, let me go here first. Sorry. Oh, no, go ahead there. Yep, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask a question about what you were just talking about.
Yes, please.
When you're saying that the major part of the problem is that we wish what happened in the past was different, is that like, especially speaking of losing someone, is that that we just straight up wish that they hadn't died, or do we? Is it something about the fantasy we put on what the relationship was?
Sure.
I just maybe this isn't really the place to ask the question.
It's always the place to ask the question, right? So, no, great question. And for me, always, I mean, what I say in my head doesn't always sit super clear with everybody. I get that. So I appreciate the clarification or the asking for clarification. One thing I will say, and I know from knowing you long enough that this wasn't the nature of the point of your question, but you referred to it as the main problem, right? I never called it a problem. What I'm saying is the reality of what we often do, which is very different from a problem. Okay. The second part is, if I understand your question, you're asking, am I suggesting that we, when looking at, say, death or loss, that we don't say, this is what I'm hearing you say, that we don't say, I wish they hadn't died? Is that what you're asking me?
No,
Well, let me, go ahead.
I'm just trying to get my trained.
Okay, let me put it this way.
Yeah,
Regardless of what story we put on it, to me is really the point of practice here. Regardless of what, regardless of what story we put on it, of what happened in the past, doesn't change it. It's the reality of what happened. And it's often our inability to embrace and accept that reality. I'm not suggesting, and again, you've known me long enough to know that I wouldn't be suggesting that when we lose loved ones, that we celebrate it. When the Buddha died, he was 80 years old, and all of his disciples were around him. They were all afraid of what was going to happen. And he said, in essence, I've left you the teachings. Strive on with diligence. And there's in Tibetan Buddhism, they have an image of this. And you see a lot of the disciples around him crying. And then there's one who is, he's not blowing balloons and throwing a big party, but he's just observing that with birth comes death. It is guaranteed for all of us. Birth, aging, sickness, death. It's what we all get. So each individual is going to respond to those things differently. But does it ruin you? That's the real practice. Whatever story we put around it is whatever story you're going to put around it. But if we don't embrace it for the reality of what happened, we're going to continue to fight with that story. And that may make it really difficult for us to find a sense of peace and happiness during loss. Yeah.
I'm dealing with some issues as far as acceptance, and it's through some trauma, but I am struggling. And what would you suggest as far as if I'm not sure what the trauma or what the pain is coming from, that I can't actually accept it? Does that make sense?
Yes. So very simply, when you look at these teachings and this practice, there is only one place that everything comes from. Where do you think that is?
I don't know, I'm new.
I know you're new. The new people are the fun ones, right? I'm also nicer to new people, so you got that working for you, right? The only place this stuff comes from, regardless of what happened, and this isn't always easy to, especially for somebody who's brand new to this, to embrace and accept, but the only place that your emotions, which is really what I'm hearing you describe, comes from is your mind.
Right.
So it is simply your response to something that happened, the trauma that you're dealing with.
Right.
And you will view that trauma differently all the time. You'll be less okay with it at times and more okay with it at other times. Still less okay with it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But your ability to respond to it with forgiveness, with compassion, with understanding, with love, is what will change your life. Right? When we have been the survivor of trauma, forgiveness isn't necessarily, if at all, for the other individual or individuals.
Yeah.
It's for whom?
Myself.
Yourself.
Right.
And one thing that helps is, have you ever harmed anyone?
I'm sure. Yeah.
I appreciate the honesty. Remember that one time, like 17 years ago, you did something that hurt somebody, right? So we do things that hurt people. That's what we do. Some people have been hurt deeper than others. And when they've been hurt deeper than others, they're very prone to causing even deeper pain, right? I've sat with people who've murdered, who've raped, who've done the most horrific things. Nothing that they've done is okay. But the depth of trauma they have experienced that led them to do things like that, in most cases, is extreme. And having this view helps us heal and understand. We don't ever have to be okay with what they did. We don't ever have to agree or like what they did. But if we're trying to heal, it'll help to have some compassion towards those who harmed us. That makes sense?
Absolutely.
Super difficult to do. And like I said, it's not like I say this once, you're like, all right, cool, I'm good. You know, it takes a while.
Yeah.
But keep at it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, yeah. Were you gonna ask a question?
No.
No?
Nope.
Okay.
Scratching my eye.
Oh, okay, I was looking down here and I saw a hand go up, so I thought, yeah. There's a question here, what do you think about what do you think about, I think what you're saying is, what do you think about AI being useful in the practice of Buddhism, kindness, growing, and humanity? I got nothing to say about that.
Yeah.
All I know is that I grew up an angry, mean person. To Rudy, I'm responding. And what I know from that is if I want to be happy, I have to figure out how to be kinder and gentler to myself and others. And I truly believe that if I can continue to cultivate and transform that kindness in myself, then I can bring that into humanity. So, yeah, I don't have the ability to answer that question any more than that. So I'm a fan of each individual working on their own kindness, and that's hard. So, yeah.
Question going back to what you were saying about, you were saying something about the stories that we tell ourselves and the reality, and the way you were saying it was if they were two different things. And I oftentimes struggle to see like the difference in my own, like my story becomes my reality. So I guess if you could speak to how to delineate what is what.
Yeah, super difficult. The question around understanding that we create stories in our head and we begin to believe them and we create them over and over and over again. And then we don't know if that story is actually reality. And when we tell ourselves the story long enough and over so many years, that story actually becomes reality. And we often lose the ability to distinguish between this fantasy story in our head and reality. They become the same. And we completely lose the ability to see the difference between the two. Which again, is not answering your question yet. I'm just starting there. One of my most beautiful Zen practices and teachings was when hungry, eat, when tired, sleep. There's no story in that. You ever had pizza? You like pizza? You take a bite of pizza. How's it taste? Great. Now somebody says to you, describe what the pizza tastes like. It is no longer what it tastes like. It is now your description of what it tastes like, which is not what it tastes like. What I'm getting at here ultimately is the harsh reality of waking up to present moment is that any story that we are telling in our own ignorant, unenlightened views is not reality. any story is not reality. It is simply our perception of reality. It is not truth. This is life-shattering. Now, it can be a little bit complicated, but for this practice, I really suggest first, forget like just going through your day. First, begin to look at what stories are you telling yourself that you've been telling yourself for years. Those stories are gone. The reality, what I mean, of that story is gone. If we can't even describe pizza as we take a bite of it and immediately after give the description of what that was and have that be what it actually is to take a bite, yet we think that the story we told ourselves for 10 years is reality. And to me, the heart of the Zen practice is right here. It is present moment. When hungry, eat. When tired, sleep. The dangerous part is we believe our stories in our head. I've been talking about this for years. Because the stories that we're telling, they evolve. We add to them. We take things away from them. We craft them to how we like them, how we want them. Even the things that we talk about in the past that we don't like. We still carve a story about the past. And then when we carve these stories, what do? Tell everybody about them. And then we get them to believe our stories. And then those stories just become more real because we've just told everybody about them. Right? Hey, let me tell you about something that happened 10 years. Oh, wow. Oh, there you go. There's another person who believes my story. This is what we do. So ultimately, every story you're telling yourself is not truth. It is only your perception of a situation. And when we begin to realize that these stories that we've been telling ourselves for so many years aren't doing us any good, many of them. Now, there are certain situations, and you've heard me talk about this, when it comes with regards to safety, things like that. Yes, it's important to understand certain people or places or situations that have caused us harm. And I'm not suggesting that this present moment means you walk into, somebody who's been abusing you. You don't just stay present and show up in front of them every single day. There is the reality that this person has abused you, so you should not show up there. But it shouldn't extend much more than that. The rest is unnecessary. So if someone is abusing you and you stop showing up, that's all you need to know. That I'm not going to show up because this person's abusing me. But what we tend to do is we then take the abuser and we create stories about them year after year after year. And then the abuse is continuously reoccurring because we're telling ourselves the story over and over again. As opposed to just saying, I'm not going there. So, and the last part, I kind of already said this, but back to your question about when you don't know the difference between story and reality. It always helps to know that your story is not reality. That's my story. One more and then we'll close, yeah.
How do you stop the story?
How do you stop the story? Meditation. The practice of meditation. Now, what most people do in meditation is they sit there, they get their little chair, their little cushion, they get all comfortable, they got their little setup going on, they got their, I'm going to meditate. And you know what they do for the next 10, 20, 40 minutes? Tell stories. But they call it meditation. Meditation is training the mind to be present. In the present moment, there is no story. Observe a candle. Observe a flower. Observe an incense stick as it burns. Observe present moment. And I don't mean meditation just sitting. When you're eating, just eat. When you're talking, just talk. When you're engaged in eye contact, just be engaged in eye contact. Every moment of our lives is an opportunity to practice being present. And in that present moment, past is gone, future isn't here. We are only always living in the present moment. Our mind is elsewhere. So when I say meditation, I mean not just seated, but in everything you're doing. You know? Karate Kid, wax on, wax off. Paint the fence, man. Yeah? All right. I'm going to close on that. We'll join palms. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all beings be at peace. May all be free from suffering. May any merit gained from this practice be transferred to those who need it most. So we've got a few quick announcements before y'all head out. Our phenomenal Dharma Bum host, Robin. Thanks, Robin.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Robin. I'm tonight's host. Just to tell you a few things, we opened the Dharma Bum Temple 17 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to those who show up. Those who lead are not nuns, monks, gurus, masters, or teachers, and are not looking for students. They're simply practitioners sharing the interpretation of the practice with others. Almost every night we have different classes led by people from various Buddhist traditions. We have a recovery sangha that meets several times a week for anyone battling addiction, and our food redistribution program is every Thursday at 5 p.m. We have classes and programs every day, and everything we offer here is always free. The full schedule is on our website and posted in the entryway above the shoe rack. We also have a lending library. If you see a book you like, feel free to borrow it and then bring it back whenever you're done with it. Please straighten your seat or cushion before you head out. We thank you for being here. We wish you well and hope to see you all again.
Thanks, Robin. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jeff.